citizen overview boards, and this evening we have Glentoria Crawford, intern at the Jacksonville Urban League Center for Advocacy and Social Justice, of which I am the director. Also with us is Jamie Krasnikor, our intern coordinator. And I'm going to have Glentoria introduce the speakers for this evening. We're very excited about this program, supported, by the way, by the Attorney General of the state, encouraging engagement on issues of racial equity and reform in terms of criminal justice reform. So, Glentoria, take it away.
Yes, may I share my screen? Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes.
These little transitions. Okay, so we are focusing on the topic of civilian review boards and public safety oversight boards. And before we get started, I'm just going to go through a quick agenda. I'm going to have my colleague, Ms. Dickerson, go through a quick agenda before we get started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Malia Dickerson, and I'm a fellow intern. I want to go over the agenda for today's engagement circle. First, we're going to have introductions with our featured guests, Speaker Anthony Finnell, Speaker Rodney W. Jacobs, and a Q&A with Chief Lakeisha Burton. And then we're going to finish with another Q&A to open up to all of our guests, and then we're going to have our closing. Also, as a disclaimer, the Jacksonville Urban League is a 501c organization whose goal is to provide a pathway for citizens to engage in open discussions with officials. The purpose of this engagement circle is to discuss the topic of civilian review boards. The Jacksonville Urban League does not endorse any of the candidates participating in tonight's discussion. And I would also like to add to the record that Mr. TK Waters was invited to participate in this engagement circle, but we did not obtain a response from him.
Wrong way. Okay, and just a quick introduction into who we are. Again, my name is Glentoria Crawford. I am an intern with the Jacksonville Urban League, and I am also a second-year law student at Southern University in Baton Rouge. And then we have my colleague, Malia Dickerson, who is also an intern, and she is also a law student at the University of Mississippi. And last but not least, we have Ms. Socorro Topete, who could not be with us today, but she was also an intern, and she studies at Humphrey School of Public Affairs. And now to introduce our speakers for tonight, we have Mr. Anthony Finnell. He is the Vice President of the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And then we have Ms. Chief Lakeisha Burton, who is the Jacksonville Sheriff candidate. And we also have Mr. Rodney Jacobs, who is the Interim Executive Director of the City of Miami Civilian Investigative Panel. Okay.
Our first speaker will be Mr. Finnell. He currently serves as the Vice President of NACOL. Today, Mr. Finnell will be providing insight into who he is and the work that he does with NACOL. Mr. Finnell has experience in law enforcement and will be providing insight into the community policing and oversight boards in the areas that he serves.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Dickerson, for that introduction, and also Mr. Stone for having us this evening and overseeing the Urban League to facilitate this engagement circle. As previously stated, I am currently an independent consultant that works in the area of civilian oversight and police practices. I retired from the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department back in 2013 after serving almost 24 years with that agency, and immediately began working in Chicago in civilian oversight. So since 2013, I've served in civilian oversight in Chicago, in Oakland, California, and as of this past June in Seattle, Washington. I'm currently back in Indianapolis, where, again, like I said, I work as an independent consultant in this area. I began working with NACOL back in 2014, and I actually joined the board in 2015, where I've served in various capacities over the years, prior to becoming the vice president, a little over a year and a half ago, I was the treasurer of NACO. But I've served on various committees, worked with various cities across the country and various individuals and groups, again, promoting and helping to institutionalize civilian oversight within those communities. And so, real briefly, because I really feel like when we have an engagement circle, it should not necessarily be the speakers doing all the talking. We want to hear from the community. We want to hear the questions and provide the answers that to the questions that are on people's minds. But I just want to point out a few things about civilian oversight and what that means and what that entails. And many people have a misconception that simply having a civilian oversight entity, whether it's a board or a commission or review council, will automatically help solve those issues within that community that they feel exist within their police agencies. And I look at civilian oversight as one component of the process. I'm a big process guy. I'm a big systems guy. So I look at the systems, say, within the police department, and look at the systems within that are in place to hold officers accountable for wrongdoing or misconduct, as well as systems that are in place to help build community trust, help the police department better serve their communities, while also helping to preserve officer safety and community safety, and become one with the community as law enforcement agencies should be. So I look at civilian oversight as a component of that process. I do firmly believe that civilian oversight should be community driven and community led for a number of reasons, but the primary reasons are that police agency and law enforcement serves the community, and the community has a right to determine what type of law enforcement services they wish to have. And sometimes that comes at a cost, sometimes that comes at a compromise. But if the community wishes to have a certain level of law enforcement, it is my belief that they should have that and work with the law enforcement agency and the city government or city administration to achieve those goals. So I think oversight is a component of that to help have an independent and impartial view or review of the processes within the department, to help share ideas and help work through solutions to solve problems within that community alongside the police agency, but not necessarily as an oversight entity that solely is focused on officer misconduct. I really believe that if you have such an agency that does that, then it really limits the success of the program, because that agency is not focused on necessarily promoting policy development, positive policy development, training, and other initiatives that help create a world-class police department. So again, I'll stop there for now, because I'm sure there will be plenty of questions afterwards, but that is my primary focus and why I have devoted this portion of my life to working in civilian oversight, because I do believe it can help a police agency become better, as well as help build or rebuild the community trust between its law enforcement and the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Finnell. I think that you provided a great foundation for what we will be discussing here today. If anyone was not familiar with oversight boards, I feel like you have highlighted your work and your intentions for what you guys at NACO do with the civilian oversight boards. Next up, we have Mr. Rodney Jacobs, who serves on the Civilian Investigative Board, and I would love for him to just speak about the work that he does there, his history with the city of Miami. I am also from Miami, so I'm very excited to hear from you, Mr. Jacobs. So whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, Glentoria. And you have to come back and visit Miami at some point. I know you say you're from here. We got to connect so I can, get my oversight fingers on you and make you part of the profession. But thank you guys so much for being here. And thanks, Anthony, for coming, being representative of NACOL out here in Florida. I'm also a board member with NACOL, and the organization with the leadership of Anthony and many others do really great work on the national level. So, and this is one of those things they do. Obviously, I'm Rodney. I work for the City of Miami CIP. It is a oversight group, panel, organization, department within the city that's been established for almost over 25 years. At this point, it was the first oversight, or not the first, but the second oversight entity in the state of Florida, the first being Miami-Dade County's oversight organization. And essentially, we're a community-driven board or panel. We have 13 individuals that have been appointed through a nominating committee process and then affirmed by our city commission and mayor. And we take in complaints from the community members involving police officers involved in misconduct. And we ensure that those cases are investigated fully. We are a hybrid version of oversight, so we have the ability to not only do internal audits of internal affairs in the police department, but also conduct our own independent investigations. We have 3 full-time private investigators on staff that take these complaints and they kind of mull over them for a period of time, 160 days, 6 months, and we make a determination or a finding of fact to our panel members. From there, our panel members give their recommendations. We write a closeout memorandum and we send it to the police chief. In Florida, as many of you all are aware, we are governed by the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, or Statute 112, that really kind of gives us our left and right limits for police officer discipline. Our board also does 2 other functions that are outside the investigation process, and that's policy review and community police mediation. Community police mediation programs, obviously similar to ones across the nation. They deal with lower level complaints like discourtesy and such. I call that, really community police equal steroids. The kind of mediations that we do at our office on the day-to-day really put the officer and the community member in the same room with 2 trained mediators to allow them to talk about the situation that they were involved in and discuss it from an area of just neutrality. So that way, when they leave the room or they leave the situation, there's some level of finality and closure that comes with the incident. And oftentimes, both parties leave with a better sense of understanding of what occurred on both sides. So that's essentially what our office does in a nutshell. I echo a lot of Anthony's comments as well that, civilian oversight in and of itself is a part of the process. I like to call it the vehicle that gets us from point A to point B. Point A, obviously, kind of being where we're at right now in the overall function of policing relations in America, and B, being something other than that, right? A lot of people will look at oversight in different programs to say, hey, these are the answers to our problems. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's a vehicle to kind of get us from where we're at now to something other than that. And I think a lot of that looks like what public safety looks like in our communities. And I know we're going to talk about a lot of this today, but oftentimes when I speak to groups surrounding around police oversight or police reform, I have people really think about what public safety looks like in your communities, not necessarily what policing looks like. And those 2 things are functionally different because they promote healthcare and wellness in ways that really uphold this notion of safety and not just policing in streets for the rule of law in and of itself. So I'll leave it at that as my introduction. I know we have a lot of questions, and happy I could be here, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. I love that you and Mr. Finnell have highlighted the different routes that you can take instead of just a regular oversight board or a civilian review panel or anything of that nature, that there are so many other options and so many other choices that an area city can enforce to try to push for that public safety. So next up, we're going to open the floor for questions. I would like to first give Chief Burton the opportunity to answer any questions from the crowd. So if anyone would like to ask some questions, if not, I can open this up with a question. if anybody has any burning questions. Yes, Mr. Scott, floor is yours.
Okay, Mr. Scott? Hello?
Yes, I see Mr. Stanley Scott has his hand raised.
Oh, I didn't have my hand raised, but we can roll. I'll be happy to
Oh, I
go.
think there's another Stanley Scott, maybe.
Yeah,
there
it's
two?
on. You saying
Okay, okay, excuse me. I see Stanley Scott over my name. That's the problem there. I'm Maceo George. I don't know. I don't know how Stanley Scott got up there, man. You taking over. Okay. Okay, I'm Maceo George. Yes, I have a question
and so
for,
do I.
for Rodney Jacobs concerning the panel. I think I heard you mention that the way you get on this panel, you are nominated. And I'd like to know who's on that nominating committee, what people are on there. Thank you.
So our ordinance is derived to allow members of the community to be on the nominating committee. So it's a shift and change on what it was at the panel's inception. Before, the individuals were just appointed by the city commission, the mayor, and the police chief. That process, although more seamless and easier, was kind of ripe with all types of politics, right? So we wanted to remove that, and so that we had just people that wanted to be there because they wanted or were really invested in this work, right? Or wanted to see their police department change should kind of mirror what the community was asking for. So right now, our nominating committee is pretty much composed of 5 people from our panel currently that sit, and they all come from different areas of the district. If for whatever reason we don't have a member that represents one of the city of Miami districts, we find someone that's in the community at large and we bring them on the nominating committee. That nominating committee interviews people, they send out applications, and once those people are confirmed, we present them as a slate to the commission. The commissioners then have to approve them.
And who has the final decision?
Well, I would say the nominating committee does, right? Because it's in our ordinance to be written this way. Now, the commissioners can make it difficult, right? They could choose not to appoint. That has happened only once, to my knowledge. Typically, they do work with us. But at the end of the day, if the commissioners don't want to appoint the person, then the position will just be vacant. And from my experience, the panel doesn't change the person that they proffered to the commission.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Mr. Scott, you can go ahead with your question.
Yes, I have a 2-part question. The first part of the question, do these citizens have a right to? Well, yes. First of all, I want to make a comment. The citizens should, if the JSO do not want to have a review board, the citizen can have one. They do not need the permission of the sheriff to have one. The only reason why they are asking the sheriff for more access, more than anything when it comes to investigation. But you can, as a citizen, you can have your own investigation to find out what's going on in your community. Yes, and part two to that would be why Jacksonville don't have one, is my question.
I could probably answer the second question more succinctly about why Jacksonville doesn't have one. So typically, if you're a city, obviously you have a police chief, and if most police chiefs, if there's been a large push to get civilian oversight in your area, whether it's due to a moment that's happened, a catastrophic event, or there's just been a push to create an ordinance, all police chiefs have to abide by that home rule law, right? So if your city commission or city council decided that, hey, today we want to have oversight, that chief would have to work in conjunction with that oversight entity because they derive their powers from the same access to power, which is that city charter, right? So if it hasn't occurred in your city, just because there hasn't been a collective nucleus to push that legislation, and that can easily be done in any city. We did it obviously here in Miami 2 years ago. in the city of North Miami, as well as in Miami-Dade County. We reinstituted it back in Miami-Dade County, but the city of North Miami, after the George Floyd protests, decided that, hey, this is something that we want. They created it, and they're working in conjunction with the police department. Now, sheriff's organizations are a bit different, and they're different because of, two different things. Sheriffs derive their power from the Constitution of the state, and so because of that, they can't necessarily be beholden to speak to or cooperate or work with an entity that derives their power from home rule, which is essentially their city charter, or maybe even in some cases, the county. And the reason why this is done this way is because obviously sheriffs have far-reaching power and ability to work their policing powers throughout the state, or also deputize just random and normal citizens, right? So oftentimes, and we saw this in Orange County when Demings was sheriff, and also when Val Demings was police chief in Orange County, that they decide not to cooperate. And although, and I think a gentleman said earlier, individual citizens, they can do their own review. It becomes a lot harder if you don't have police department cooperation, because they have the tools and resources and information that you need in order to conduct an investigation. They have the police officers that will need to make statements, and they can choose not to engage within that. So a lot of the information that you would need to do something that's meaningful as citizenry would need the cooperation of the police department. And so two things make that difficult on the county level, and that's obviously because sheriffs derive their power from the Constitution, and also Statute 112, Police Officers Bill of Rights, which determine how, one, individual police officers can be investigated, but two, also who can discipline them and when they can be disciplined. So those two pieces of legislation is probably the reason why it hasn't been done in Jacksonville. I do know former Sheriff Glover, I believe his name is. He was somewhat of a proponent of oversight. His position, I believe, was that he would like oversight, but he doesn't think it's a good idea because normal citizens won't be as hard on his officers as he would be. I believe that, if I'm quoting him correctly, that's something that he's said in the past. So I don't think it's necessarily a full stop, obviously. I think if any county could utilize it, it would definitely be Jacksonville, being the biggest, at least in geographical space in the state of Florida. And it'll be useful. It'll be useful for reform measures and for public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Mr. Sloan? Question?
Sloan.
Sloan?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good. My question, I guess, Mr. Finnell or Mr. Jacobs can answer this. Of course, I think the city of Jacksonville, the citizens have been asking for civilian oversight board, review board for decades, for years, the whole 10. And we know what's going on with the city charter. My question is, how do we go about creating one? Again, I've just heard everything that Mr. Jacobs has said, but again, I'm pretty sure people have done their homework. So what are the steps, or what could be the possible steps for the city of Jacksonville to get a civilian oversight board? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sloan, I'll take a stab at this. There's a couple steps. I mean, obviously, you can go begin at a grassroots level, speak to your city council members, get some support from your council to pass an ordinance. And you go through that process of creating a proposal or an ordinance that would establish your oversight entity. And, that obviously is community driven. So, and I'm talking now about your police department, because again, Mr. Jacobs spoke to the sheriff's department. It's a very similar process, but it requires a little different avenue. You still have to have the agreements and the MOUs or the ordinance in place. But creating an ordinance to create an entity would be the first step. And, NACO as an organization can assist in language. As an organization, we do not draft, community language. There, you would have to have someone on the ground in your community, partnering with an attorney. You can definitely look at examples and other drafts from other cities on how their ordinance reads. NACO would be able to offer some advice on what an ordinance may need to include, but the actual language, you would have to prepare that with your city council and take it through that process at the local level. There's also a pathway to create a more binding or more standing institution through a charter amendment, where you amend your city charter and actually have this agency put into the charter. We were in Oakland. When I was in Oakland, the community did that after many, many years of having an entity through the ordinance process. They had gained enough signatures on a petition to actually have it put on the charter, went to the council, presented their case. It was actually put on the charter, and at the following election, the community voted, the city residents voted, and it actually became a police commission as part of their charter. So both, take time, both take a lot of research, because what you don't want is to rush through and get something that's created that doesn't really do what the community wants it to do. It doesn't, whether it's an investigative entity that's created or a review entity that's created, you want to have the outcome be what it is you would desire. But that requires lots of communication with various members of the community. That requires communication and conversations with the police department or the agency that would be under the oversight, and that requires communication with the police union, because you have state laws, you have, I think the Police Officers Bill of Rights was mentioned. There's other state laws that are specific to each state that have to be taken into consideration as to what power, what authority, what task and information that a civilian outside entity could have access to from their police department. And then what could be disclosed to the public. Some states have laws that limit what disciplinary information can be disclosed. So all of that would have to be taken into consideration. Mr. Maceo, George had made a comment about where you don't need, the cooperation or permission from the police agency, and he's right. You don't need the permission, but in order for, at the end of the day, you want your oversight to be something that both the police department, the line officers, as well as the community have some faith in. And you want it to be impartial, you want it to be independent, but you also want the people that it serves, both the police and the community, to believe in the process that is implemented within that agency. So if you don't have a level of cooperation, then you're not going to have that level of acceptance on either side. So again, when I say you have to speak to everyone, there may be segments of the community, there in every community, where there's activists that are so far out there that they don't even align with other community members, but they're part of the community that the police serve. Therefore, their voice needs to be included in the process, so that everyone feels like they've had a hand in preparing this, since it's going to serve everyone. But the quickest way would be, like I said, through an ordinance. But either way, it's going to require a lot of communication, and I would say a lot of research outside of the Jacksonville community to see what has happened and what has been done in other similarly sized communities across the country, to determine what type of oversight you want. whether you want an investigative model, whether you want an auditor-based model or a review model or a hybrid of the three. So I hope that answers your question, sir.
It did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Finnell. Mr. Sampson, you have a question?
Thank y'all so much. I want to thank Urban League for putting this on, and Mr. Finnell and Mr. McLeod, Mr. Jacobs for hopping on and sharing your experiences. I really appreciate that. Just to give some perspective for Jacksonville, I know the past few years, a civilian review board had been introduced as legislation to the city council by Councilman Garrett Dennis, and it's been stuck in committee and deferred. Each time there hasn't been any movement from city council. And here the Fraternal Order of Police speaks out against it in a very harsh way, calling it like emotional driven. It's not something that is good for the people because people are going to think on emotions and whatnot. So that's been a main obstacle for us here in terms of getting any type of civilian oversight. You know, there's groups, I'm a part of an organization, the Jacksonville Community Action Committee, and we're going to basically take the same legislation that Councilman Dennis has proposed, and we're calling it a Public Safety Oversight Committee. And our plan is to go to the ballot. Jacksonville has a charter system, but Jacksonville as a city is much different than other cities, I believe. You know, we are a consolidated city, which essentially makes the numbers that we have to get for a ballot much higher. We'd have to get around 40,000 signatures to put anything, like 5% of total registered voters. We have to get 40,000 signatures to get anything placed on the ballot. And our goal is to get that placed on the ballot in 2024. My question for you both is, and especially Mr. Finnell, since you have kind of more of a, you know, you have national experience, I believe, in kind of seeing different struggles around this. What has been sort of the key takeaways in overcoming resistance from the sheriff's office or those agencies and the police unions in regards to getting a civilian oversight done in a concrete way? And as well as for Mr. Jacobs, one question for you is, have you had any resistance in Miami in regards to lawsuits from police unions and other entities that have tried to kind of take away power from the oversight panel that y'all have there? Thank y'all so much.
Yeah, I can start. Also,
yeah.
Clintori, is it possible to stop sharing screens so that we can see everyone? I don't know if that's, so that way I can see when Anthony's talking, so I won't like try to jump in if not. All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we oftentimes get challenges sued by the police union. And we also have I wouldn't say it's an adversarial relationship, but we definitely have a tense relationship with our city attorney's office, since we are a city department. Oftentimes, if the city's being sued and we're saying something different from the city, it can create tensions. And typically your biggest liability, if you're the city attorney's office, is your police department, right? So if we're saying that an officer acted wrongly, and they're saying he did everything right, it can cause tension. But obviously the main things we do get are lawsuits from the police union. We actually had a case 2 years ago, well, really 3 years ago at this point. They went all the way to the Supreme Court of Florida based upon a subpoena that we served to an officer to testify. He believed that the subpoena didn't apply to him since he was a police officer, and that guarantee only applied to him. And the Supreme Court told him he was wrong, right? So you do get sued. And the reason, and this is a really good question, especially if if you have the ability to amend the templated ordinance or the charter revision to include two large things, because you could eventually get civilian oversight, but if the city doesn't fund that entity or that department, then it's all for nothing, right? And that's the big thing that our county oversight department faced almost 10 years ago, is that they were literally written in the charter and had their own ordinance, but it decided not to give them any money, right? So in our ordinance, it requires that we get 1%, at least 1% of the salary and wages line item of the police department. So that gives us a floor. We will always have a minimum floor. It can go higher than that, but it can never go below that. And so it's tied to a line item that we can foresee that will never get diminished, and that's the salary and wages of the police department. The second really thing you need, I think, at least here in the state of Florida for sustainable oversight, is your own independent counsel. And you need that for two reasons. One, because you're probably gonna get sued by the union. And two, the city attorney doesn't necessarily act in the best interest of oversight entities because of that tense relationship I spoke about earlier. So I like to think that at least our ordinance is a pretty good starting place for model ordinances, especially for the state of Florida. So if you can incorporate some of those mechanisms in your ordinance for the city council or for the charter amendment that goes to the ballot, I think it would be useful. Obviously, there's only but so many words I think you can put on a ballot charter amendment item. I think you maybe get 150 words at most or something like that. So definitely narrowly tailor it as best as possible. So we do have some model legislation that can help with that if you guys are interested. To the other part of your question, what are some things that we've seen here that are always contentious, especially when you're battling the police union, that are saying nasty things about oversight? I always go in with two things, right? The first thing is, hey, literally, we're all on the same team here, right? If the police union and police chiefs and sheriffs are often talking about, hey, we're doing the right thing, we will continue to do the right thing. A bad apple spoils the bunch, and we don't want anyone to tarnish our badge. Well, guess what? I want all those things too. I want all those things in that order all the time. So we can agree on those things, which is probably 90% of the things we can agree on. Why are you so opposed to what we're doing? And from there, they're probably going to hem and haw and stuff and say, you guys are out to get us, and you're just a boogeyman or stuff like that. And I follow up with the same notion that, hey, we're not out to get anyone. Because at the end of the day, it's not hard to tell the truth twice, So if it's a police officer that we're investigating for misconduct and he goes to internal affairs or she goes to internal affairs and she says this has occurred, okay, come and tell us the same story. And if that's the truth, then the truth will allow. And so that's what it's really about. Obviously, the biggest component of police oversight is transparency and accountability. And I would wager that any executive level police officer, if you're a chief of police, one of the things that keep you up at night are probably police officers making really bad decisions. So transparency and accountability goes a long way in those spaces. And if that's the things they're preaching on the dais, in public comment, and in meetings, we're on the same team. What are we talking about? Let's move on. Let's figure out ways that we can reform. Now, those other things on how to get there, how do we get to the reform measures? You may disagree upon those things, but the substance of why police oversight is created in and of itself is something that no one, I feel, at least upper level police department, can disagree with.
You, Mr. Jacobs, he actually touched on everything I was going to say. I mean, he gave specific examples. I was going to speak on the same concepts and principles. One thing, lawsuits are going to come. So to avoid lawsuits, say about the legislation or the ordinance, or once it's passed and immediately there's a lawsuit filed to stop everything in motion. One way to avoid that is to include your union, your FOP, or police officers association, whatever you call it, include them in the conversation in the beginning. Now, that doesn't mean that at the end of the day, what they bring to the table ends up in the ordinance, but there may be some legitimate concerns that can be worked into the ordinance in such a way that it doesn't impede on officers' rights from the Bill of Rights, and that it provides, again, that level of transparency, independence, impartiality, and fairness. That's their biggest fear. When I say they, being the police officers and FOP or any of those representatives, their biggest fear is that this is going to be an entity or a group of people that will be out to get them, will not understand the processes, will bring bias to the table, and therefore will render a decision on a split second action that an officer has to make in the field, but they'll render a decision based on emotion and not on the policies or procedures or rules or laws that the officer must follow. Now, if you bring everyone to the table and you craft an ordinance, obviously someone's not going to be happy with that final product. But again, it's not an individual that you're trying to please, it's a community you're trying to serve. So you bring the best product to the table, whatever that ordinance may be, whatever that charter legislation may be. And if the community votes for it and approves it, then the union will have to decide what they're going to do with that. When I was in Oakland, the community fought for years to get the police commission. They had an ordinance that really, they had an entity that were operating under an ordinance that was pretty ineffective. And when I came in, the city manager gave me one mandate, which was to make the current organization relative. Now, the reason being, because the current organization at that time was eventually going to become the investigative arm of the police commission. But in order to do that, it had to be relevant in its current state. So once it became relevant in its current state, then the community was able to get that ballot measure get that measure on the ballot, and it was voted and approved and became a police commission. But without having the investigative arm in a position to at least show the union and at least show the police department that their investigations were fair and impartial and unbiased, there's no way the police union was going to throw everything they could at it to prevent it from becoming a police commission. And they did put up a fight, but once it became a police commission, they did not file suit to stop it. They said, okay, we have to work through this process. There were some things in the commission's charter measure that the community members didn't like, because they had, again, it was a negotiation and it was a process, but at the end of the day, they voted on it and it was approved. So it is a lengthy process. It does require that you sit down and have some level of cooperation. And in fact, there's going to probably be some level of compromise. That's part of negotiations. But again, I think, and Mr. Jacobs raised another good point about their legislation, and you have access to that so that you can use it as a template, because he raised two very important things that many communities who don't do the research find themselves caught up in, where they're not tied to the police budget. So their funding, they'll just be underfunded or be the first to receive cuts and become ineffective that way. And they don't have their own independent legal counsel that is separate from the city attorney's office. So when there comes time for a dispute, it's a question. I'm not going to say a city attorney doesn't wall off in their office and separate and partition out this kind of work, but there's always going to be that question of impropriety, that appearance that, yeah, we have a city attorney working for us, but ultimately the city attorney works for the best interests of the city. So there's always going to be that appearance, and you want to remove all appearances of impropriety and impartiality when you're dealing with oversight. It has to be an unbiased, independent entity, and it has to operate that way at all times for it to be effective and respected on both sides of the aisle. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I see that we have 3 more people with questions. I would like to first just let everyone know that Miss Burton actually had a prior engagement, so she did have to leave for a campaign event, but her colleague is here. I'm not sure who that is. May you identify yourself? Colleague that came with Miss.
Yes, good afternoon or good evening. I'm Travis Cox. I'm with Chief Burton in her campaign.
Thank you, thank you. I'm sure everyone will have some questions for you. I would just like to get through these 3 questions real quick, and then we can circle back to you, Mr. Cox. Thank you. Mr. Scott?
Yes, very briefly, I was just concerned with the gentleman. He kept talking about the FOP. I'm trying to understand, what do the FOP has to do with it? I'm thinking the fraternity order of police. Don't they represent the police department? I mean, that directly, indirectly, yes. I thought they represent the members, but in reality they represent the police department. So why would they have 2 positions on the committee? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Scott, you are correct. The Fraternal Order of Police, their primary goal is to represent police officers, in negotiation for contracts and benefits, but also if a police officer gets in trouble, discipline, or if they're involved in a shooting or other critical incident. The reason why I say they should not have, let me make this clear. I do not believe that on any police commission or police board or review board that they should have a representative from the police department. You can always bring in someone from the police department if that board has questions. You can always bring in a subject matter expert, but when it comes, or you can bring them in, say if you are doing a policy development, you may bring in a subject matter expert as you prepare your policy draft for review and consideration. But to be on the board and have a say in, say if there's a review of an internal affairs incident or misconduct, I don't believe, that's my personal belief. I don't believe that, because I believe that these boards are community driven. Now, having said that, police are part of the community. FOP are part of the community. So there is a place for them to have a say, the say being, how will this board operate? What goes into the ordinance, but not the day-to-day. And I think it is important that you hear from them. You hear from them so you can understand what is their concern. Is their concern for not wanting civilian oversight of their agency because they say civilians don't understand what law enforcement is, they don't know? Well, then that's easily rectified, by having ride-alongs, doing trainings, and not just doing it once at the beginning, but having periodic reviews of policies and having people from the police department come in and explain the policy and the process and the procedures. So you can rectify that, because police officers, before they become police officers, they don't know either. And what do? They go through an academy, they go through training. So that can be rectified. But I don't believe that an FOP or police officers need to have representation on a board, because that is, whether it's an actual power dynamic, it is definitely a perceived power dynamic, and they don't need to be on the board. You can always bring them into the board meeting for specific questions or presentation. So if you heard me say that they should have a place on the board, I'm sorry, because that is not the case. But I do think, in part of the process of developing a board and part of the process of how it operates and to pass legislation or whatever, they need to be a part of that process so that their voice and consideration, just like everyone else's is included in the final decision.
I could just add on to a little bit of that too, and it kind of goes in conjunction with what someone else said earlier, and I had mentioned about our ordinance and how it came to being. Um, I think it's really important for everyone to understand that oversight is going to be a continual fight, no matter what junction you get to. And it's more especially true here in the state of Florida. You will continually be fighting for your existence. And I say that in one way to not only prepare you for it, but also to ensure that the people that you hire or elect or put in the position to lead this organization is committed to it consistently with longevity, because they're really gonna have to dig their heels in to start it, to create it, and to sustain it. And it can be a tough haul, right? So just kind of understand that it's going to be a continual bout, even when you think it's comfortable, even when you got it going, even when the ordinance passed, it's in the charter, you got the funding, things are looking good, you're taking cases, you're getting sued every single day. It's going to be a new lens to a different fight. I think that's important to kind of keep in mind. It's sobering, but it also keeps our job really exciting and useful and meaningful. And so in keeping this whole idea of a continual fight every day, and also keeping in mind that you want to remain sane and not burn out, you have to pick your battles. And I think in some of the things that you're going to come into encountering with, you're really going to have to pick battles that you know won't have a tremendous impact on the overall success of the organization. We have a police appointed representative on our board, and by and large, he's great. Every now and then, when a new police chief comes in, they may select a new person, and that person may just be there to be an obstructionist. But at the end of the day, really what matters is the vote of those other 12 panel members as well that we have. And I often say that I can find probably 10, at least 10, as many as 12 people that will vote in favor, or at least along the lines of the people. So if I'm a betting man and I have to pick battles and there's things and concessions that they want, if I have to give up a seat in a non-perfect world for the police representative, know that it is not the end of the world. Police oversight can still be done. It can still be very much effective, and it still can be meaningful and useful for your organization. Now, to Anthony's point, maybe don't come out of the chute with that and say like, hey, we're here for this. Maybe that's a concession later on, third, fourth, fifth read later with legislation. But just know if that is something that is conceded, it is not a showstopper.
Mm-hmm. And I want to real quick, and I want to just give an example of when I first arrived in Oakland. Again, my mandate was to make that agency relevant. So it's a pretty broad mandate. I was given lots of money for training, lots of money to get us a new office, upgrades on equipment, and staff, bring the staffing levels up to what the ordinance had required. The ordinance required one investigator for every 100 police officers. Well, there were, I think, 800 or 900 Oakland police officers. We only had 2 investigators. So right there, and had been at 2 for years. So right there was an issue, but the funding was provided, which told me that the council was behind it. So first thing I did was meet with the strongest, most vocal, and most productive community activist group, community group, and their leadership. And I sat down and said, okay, what is it you want? What is it you're trying to do? Where are you trying to go? And how can I help you get there? And they told me. Then I set up a meeting with the union president and his leadership. And my questions were, so why are you so against this? And, what's the history? What's going on here? And they told me. Well, when I asked them what they wanted, they told me what they wanted. And guess what? It was the same thing as the community activists. The same complaints I got from the community group about the FOP and about the police department were the same complaints I got from the FOP about the community group, and vice versa. So I sat there and I told the FOP leadership, you guys want the same things these folks want. Do you realize that? And I said, I've sat with them. You said the same things. So why is it that you guys can't come to the table? Well, it was years and years of verbal back and forth and distrust and, just a lot of hurt feelings and things that both groups had done to one another. In the end, I could go to the FOP and say, we're going to create this, we're proposing this policy. What do you think about it? And I could send them a draft of the policy and they could give me their feedback. I bring that feedback back to our commission, to our board, and we create a policy that everyone agrees with, and it goes right through without any fight. That had never been done before. They couldn't agree, prior to that, they couldn't agree on anything. And even if the policy was good for both sides, they wouldn't agree just on principle. But now we were able to reach policy agreements, reach agreements on officer discipline that was actually meaningful and wasn't being taken to arbitration. So, again, I'm really a strong proponent of just sitting down and doing a lot of listening, a lot of communication. And at the end of the day, you make the best decision as an oversight entity based on all that information. And I'm not saying everybody's going to be happy, because everyone wasn't happy. Even when things worked out that looked like it benefited both, it still would be someone unhappy. That's okay. I could live with that, because everyone at least brought their voice to the table and their position was included. So that's why, I really push bringing the union in, because they're going to come in one way or the other. So you're either going to do all the work and then you're going to get hit with a lawsuit that stops everything in its tracks, or you bring them in on the front end so that even if they file a lawsuit, now you can go into the court and say, but on this date and this date and this date, we met and we discussed X, Y, and Z, and these were the agreements, and here it is. So what's the basis of the lawsuit? Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Hawthorne, do you have a question? I understand that you will have to leave the meeting, so I want you to be able to ask your question before you have to go.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm new to the idea of oversight boards. So do you think there are any downsides to implementing them into our community?
When you say downsides, I personally, I don't think there is, if it's what the community wants. If the community wants oversight, I don't think there's a downside to it. I think, if the only downside I could see is if it's an entity that operates, does not operate independently, or does not operate impartially, or does operate with bias. There's clearly a downside, because then any decision that comes out of that primarily is going to be a decision that's always going to be questioned as being legitimate or valid. So someone's not going to respect it, the decisions that come out, if it doesn't operate in those parameters. Again, coming from a law enforcement background, I see benefit to both the community and to law enforcement. And oftentimes I have conversations with police leadership who are opposed to oversight, because I want to know what is their opposition. And I've even had leadership say, well, we do a very good job with our internal affairs investigations and our internal review, and we hold our officers accountable. And then I tell them, well, then the benefit, the oversight, is that people will finally get to see that, because you're doing a poor job. Obviously, you're doing a poor job of sharing that information or telling your story. So then the benefit of oversight becomes they'll get to see, basically how the sausage is made. They'll get to see it. And then they can go back to the community and share that. So it makes your job easier. It doesn't mean they're going to come in and have a negative impact on something you're doing well. They can tell your story for you better than you can. So I don't see a downside to it, really. unless, of course, the oversight entity itself has leadership that is anything but independent, impartial, and unbiased.
Yes, I have a follow-up to that right quick. Okay, when you explain it to them that way, what is their comeback? Because what you said sounds very reasonable and very acceptable. So when you explain it like that to them, what do they say then?
Well, Mr. George, in my experience, has either been their eyes open up, they get an aha moment and realize that, or they dig their heels in. And if someone digs their heels in after you, and it doesn't matter if it's oversight, but if someone digs their heels in after you've given them a reasonable, rational explanation for anything, then you got to make a decision to quit wasting your time with them.
Oh.
Okay. I mean, again, that's one individual, and chiefs come and go. I mean, you know, chiefs rarely last more than 5 years for various reasons. One, it's a very stressful job. It takes a lot out of an individual to be a good police chief and be in that position. You know, they have lots of demands on their plate, and 5 years is a long time to endure that much stress. So they come and go. But again, if the community wants it, even the most stringent, stuck in their ways police chief, they get enough pressure from the top because they answer to a mayor or a city manager or someone. Either the chief's got to go or they got to acquiesce to the will of the community. But I think most, when you explain it to them and show them the benefit to their department, to their officers, then they can see how it can work for them. And again, it all boils down to developing that level of trust between both the community and the police and the community, and trust in the process and trust in the system, not necessarily trust in an individual, because this has to outlive any one individual.
Is it my turn?
Yeah,
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Something. Mr. Jacobs.
No, I mean, I don't have any much more to add to that too. I think when you look at oversight, you really have to keep in mind that the organization is bigger than obviously any one person, as Anthony mentioned. You really want an organization that's purpose-driven and not person-driven. And I think if you can keep that in mind, you have something that kind of rises above that political fray, because any type of oversight leadership has to remain neutral. You want to be that unbiased, impartial investigator. You want to be the individual that can at least go into both rooms and come out with something that's meaningful and impactful for the community. And that's what safety really looks like in our communities. It's finding that nexus between the two that allow people to feel safer in their communities. And all that doesn't look like policing all the time, especially for certain communities that are marginalized. But in order to find that out, you really have to have the purpose of oversight in mind. As soon as, much like most things, as soon as, you know, egos or politics in some cases get involved, it kind of dilutes that, and it really does get away at the beauty of oversight. So I think if you can obviously institute oversight with good foundational leadership and good legislation, there's really no downsides to it.
Is it my turn, man?
Yes, Mr. Sloan, you can go ahead.
I would tell you, when I received the email and about this Zoom meeting, I didn't know what it was going to be about, because I knew we here in Jacksonville didn't have a civilian oversight board or review board. And I wanted to come and again, just listen and give whatever tidbits I could, and, you know, take notes and everything. I'm retired Army. I'm definitely one that believe in accountability, responsibility, communication. And I would tell you, Mr. Finnell and Mr. Jacobs, you know, what you guys have been talking about this evening, to me, has been on point. It really has been. I still don't know where we're going with this meeting, because we're here in Jacksonville. And again, I think it's needed, but it's not something that we have. Mr. Jacobs, I'm sorry, Mr. Finnell, I heard you say that you went to Oakland and everything that they had been doing hadn't been working per se. And I wrote it down here. You said you went there and you had to make it relevant. Make it relevant, making it applicable, making it relevant. And by you making it relevant, you basically kind of changed everything. You sat down with the community, you sat down with the FOP, and you found that you guys both saying this, that they both saying the same thing. And my question kind of comes in because again, I've come back here to Jacksonville, and I've heard Mr. Sampson say that City Councilman Dennis Garrett presented a plan and whatnot. And I think that I try to be involved with the community, but I know also there's a status quo in every community, but here also, I haven't heard anything about that. And I know kind of in our community, it's always the pastors, it's the certain group of people, certain particular organization that someone always speaks for the community. And for me, I don't like that. I like to be involved. I've served my country, I'm educated, I'm a parent, I do this and that. I like to be involved, even if just listening to the decision makers are being a part of the process. So I would like to know when you were as you are in Miami, Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Finnell, as you've gone around doing your things. Because Mr. Finnell, I heard you say that you went to a specific organization who was the most loudest and whatnot. And I don't always agree with that because you said, both of you have said something that you spoke about having that leader or leaders that's impartial, unbiased, that's want to do what's best, what's right. But how did you go about doing that? And how involved was the community in these particular cities that you went into? Because you don't always get that. You always sometimes get one-sided. You guys spoke about understanding policies, understanding procedures. And too often we are so emotional. We have some of our most educated people that sit in the pulpit, businesses, whatever. They're so full of emotions where they don't understand policies and procedures. And again, serving in the military, that's important.
Mm-hmm.
You learn the system and then you make the system work for you. But you got to understand the system. You got to understand the policies. So my question is, again, dealing with the civilian, not civilian, but with the community, how involved was the community? As well as, do you necessarily, well, just deal with that part first.
Mr. Sloan, I will tell you, yeah, I went to the most vocal, loudest, strongest organization. That doesn't mean that they represented the community. Okay.
Yes, sir.
I gave you a little tidbit of my background.
Right.
Okay. I was a homicide investigator for almost half of my career. So homicides don't happen in the best of places, in the best of neighborhoods, in the best of communities. They don't happen at high noon, So in order to solve my homicides, I had to go into those communities, walk the streets, talk to the people, sit down at coffee tables, kitchen tables, eat a bowl of greens, plate of greens, and then grandma gave her grandson the permission to tell me what happened. You see, I had to come to the people. I had to go to them. They didn't come to me. I didn't sit at my desk and wait for Crime Stoppers and tips to come in. I had to go out and generate that stuff. So when I got to Oakland, the first thing is I didn't know anybody in Oakland. I had no history there. I still had my house in Indianapolis. So I didn't lay down roots there. But the first 90 to 100 days when I was in Oakland, I was working 7 days a week. On Saturday and Sunday, I was hitting community meetings. I was hitting churches. I am a pastor's kid, so I can definitely relate to pastors. See, I was hitting all those different communities and all those different segments of our community that usually have their voice and their hand in different things. I'm apolitical, so I was independent from that. And for me to make it relevant, I had to literally go out and knock on doors as if I was working a homicide, talk to people, tell them who I was, tell them about the agency, and ask and listen. Did more listening than talking, you know? And then I brought all that back. So the most vocal in the community at the council meetings and so forth, they didn't have any more leverage with me than grandma sitting on the stoop talking to watching the kids play, you know, in the middle of the courtyard. That person actually had more leverage over me than the loud one that would go into all the council meetings. But I considered everybody's position and brought it back. Then I made the decisions, you know, for me to make it relevant, that agency relevant, I had to make the decisions and stand on it. So it made people angry, but it also moved the ball forward because I didn't have any outside agendas. I didn't have any past hurts or past harms to get retribution on, you know. I just was about moving the agency forward the best way, using the resources, financial resources that the city council had given me in the best way. I had absolutely no agenda outside of that. You know, I didn't care about a wrong that had happened in the community 20 years ago to the point to where it would influence my decision that would have a negative impact on our progress now. I care about what happened 20 years ago was so it doesn't happen again, but not to go get retribution because I didn't think the officer was punished enough or whatever, you know, so that's how I was able to do it.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so
Thank you.
I'll add two things to that. And thank you for serving, Mr. Sloan. I'm also in the Army. My dad was a 30-year veteran. I'm in the reserve now. So one thing I will say, and I thought, you know, in working in this capacity, I had those same tenets that I held true to, you know, those true Army core values. But after working in this position for so long, I can say there's a very large difference between what the Army does or what the military does and what police do on the day-to-day. And that duality, although it may seem similar in the kind of components that we champion, they're very, very different, especially when it comes to notions of discipline and accountability. And so I just want to lead with that in a sense, because I feel like oftentimes we kind of say like, oh, you know, cops get in line, they'll do what they're told, and they march to the beat of the old drum. That is not necessarily the case as a soldier would. So I think it's I always try to, you know, point that out, because I think when people look at, you know, we can just reform policing and it'll be easy. They, you know, they have a hierarchy and it's top down order. That is not necessarily the case. So it's important to keep that in mind. Really echoing Anthony's same comments, you really need to build stakeholders, and you need to build what I like to call a constituency. And the reason for that is not only because you need buy-in from the community members, but also because more often than not, people don't necessarily show up to support oversight unless they've been directly affected by police misconduct. Let's be honest. At the end of the day, parents have kids, and kids need things, and people have lives. At the end of the day, if you were to, you know, go to every major little area or community center in your community with this whole mantra, like let's just say if we took what we're doing right now on the road in Jacksonville, at community centers in various locations, at parks in various locations, in libraries in various locations, guaranteed maybe less than 5 people will show up at every location. Even if we had the best marketing team ever, I'm talking about Twitter, Instagram, in the paper, you might get 5 people. It's not because people aren't interested. It's because people have better things to do, unless they've been directly affected by officers and officers' misconduct, right? And so and the reason why that's also a question of what does safety look like in our communities, it's because people often don't necessarily use police services either. Although we spend so much money on police services in our government, more often than not, you may not call the police officers the duration of your entire life, right? At most, I think on average, if we were to average everyone, all 303 million people across America, you may say that every American may call the police department maybe 1.5 times throughout their entire life. And that's averaging it with people that probably called well more than 1.5 times, right? So policing services, although we spend a lot of money on them, and we like to think that that's what keeps me safe at night, at the end of the day, a lot of people don't use those services, so they aren't directly affected by police officers. And so there's not a lot of interest in that until there is, right? So to Anthony's point, that oftentimes you do have to go to these organizations that are beating the drums and that will show up to commission meetings, that will support you, that are those squeaky wheels or those gadflies in some situations. Not because you necessarily believe in everything that they're saying or how they're going about doing it, it's also because they're the ones that show up. And in a lot of this work that we do, we need to build constituency with the individuals that we know will have our backs, that will show up, because at the end of the day, it's about the sustainment of the organization and not just talking to everyone that wants to lend an ear or has a good idea. A lot of that is just basic complications of communication theory, but it's also ensuring that you're using your time effectively. And so in these situations, when you really only get one bite of the apple to make oversight work, you have to champion moments that will give you the best yield for your time and services. And sometimes that looks like talking to the loudest person on the block. That's not the only thing you should do, but it's something that you probably should lead with.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. You actually answered a question of mine. I was going to ask about the role of citizens in regards to pushing for that public safety and that transparency. And I believe that you're right, showing up, not even just in this, but anything that the community would like. Before we move on, I would like to give Mr. Cox an opportunity to speak because Ms. Burton actually had to leave earlier in our meeting. So I would love for Mr. Cox to provide some insight on Chief Burton and her view on oversight boards.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Travis Cox. I am with the local agency here at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, working on my 27th year at the agency. I've been on Chief Burton's team since day one, so I can almost finish her sentences by now. When it comes to civilian review boards, here's her position. You know, she feels that civilian review boards mean so many different things to different people. And even tonight, I heard Rodney say that, you know, part of their board down in Miami, they do audits. I haven't heard that before, where they actually audit units. So the traditional civilian review board, as we normally hear it, you know, it's looking at use of force or excessive force for law enforcement. She is not in favor of civilian review boards. And here's why. She feels that it's hard for someone that has never walked in a policeman's shoes to come in and say, you know, in this split-second decision the officer made, he or she was right or wrong. So what she is in favor of is bringing in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which is a state agency, to investigate all our officer-involved shootings. So currently what happens now, the state attorney's office conducts an independent investigation for the criminality of a shooting, and then the state attorney or the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office will do administrative part. She wants to remove the Sheriff's Office out of that equation and let Florida Department of Law Enforcement take over that investigation. And the reason for that is to create that transparency, remove JSO. You know, JSO shouldn't be investigating JSO. And so she wants to make sure that we can show that transparency. And those of you on the call that are from Jacksonville, you know, we as an agency, and I heard it mentioned earlier, we need to do a better job of advertising and telling the community what the process is, how the process is going along, being more accessible and accountable to our citizens. And that will help build that trust and that transparency. Because what happens now, and I've seen it throughout my career, is you see a shooting happening on the news, or you may even been on the scene or drove by the shooting, and then 6 months later you hear that the officer was cleared, and you never hear anything in between. So her goal is, when she's in office, is to make sure that citizens know what's going on every step of the way. She wants to make sure that the body camera video, because all of our officers now below the rank of lieutenant wear a body camera, body worn camera, make sure that footage is given out sooner than it is now. So once that we know that the investigation's at a time where that video can be released, and give it out, and so people can see what's going on. So she wants to make sure that she's much more transparent than previous administrations and how that process works. And finally, I'll say that one of the things that the former Sheriff Williams did, he created a transparency board, which was made up of different civilians that were picked to be on this board. They came up with different recommendations back in 2015, and those recommendations was given to the sheriff's office. However, those recommendations were put on the shelf and they were never implemented. So she wants to re-energize that board by getting different members of the community from different segments of the community and revitalize that board and get that transparency. So that way we're getting input from our citizens. They have a seat at the table, as well as she wants to start doing what she calls a budget workshop. So where, the Jacksonville fiscal year is 500, a lot of money for budget workshops where people can see where that money is going and have some input of what's going on with our budget. And then finally, to be more transparent and more communicate better with our citizens, is she plans to do what she calls a state of the agency address each year. So she'll be very transparent with, hey, these are our goals, these are our objectives, these are the things that as an agency that we want to accomplish in the upcoming year, just like the president does the State of the Union address. She wants to do a State of the Agency address and hear those concerns that citizens have. So that's her position on civilian review boards, why she doesn't support them, but some of the things that she wants to do to increase transparency and give our citizens a voice in what's going on in the sheriff's office.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Scott, did you have a question or is your hand up from earlier? I will circle back. Mr. Jacobs? Mr. Jacobs or Mr. Sloan?
Yeah, I just kind of want to respond to Travis's comments or Mr. Cox's comments. I want to advise your staff for free. Like, I just want to talk to you. I mean, the fact that you're here is phenomenal. And I'd imagine you guys probably have run the data and analytics as to what talking points work best for you guys to win your campaign. I just don't think she truly understands civilian oversight for you guys to have the position of her not supporting it. And that seems to be really contrary. I mean, even yourself, you started with, hey, I didn't know civilian oversights could do it. In the very next breath, you said she's not in support of them. So it's kind of hard not to be in support of something that she may not fully understand. And I think a lot of police departments look at it as these individuals that don't understand what our life is money more than quarterbacking us, and that's not fair. And by and large, that's just not the case. Everyone that is in civilian oversight, I mean, these are some of the most brilliant minds in America. All of us come with some level of law enforcement background or military background, by and large. I mean, maybe there's some outliers. I would say maybe Anthony, you may know better than me, 10% or so that don't have law enforcement background. But some of these people are the most brilliant minds in America, from inspector general's offices, from some of the best lawyers in their field as well. And so that kind of contrasted with this notion of we rather have FDLE do it. It's okay. Half a dozen of one, 6 of another, because there's investigators within FDLE that don't have law enforcement experience either. And if you look at their clearance rates on cases, it's less than 10% because they just have too much to deal with. And so oftentimes when cases get kicked to them, they don't do those cases justice. But what's more than that, and I understand that that's just, a conversation on, we rather just have them do it. And that's probably the easier answer, right? Maybe you guys have been advised to say, we'll have FDLE do it. That's better than us doing it. And everyone should be happy because of that. But the fact of the matter is FDLE probably only does major violent crimes associated with police officers, right? So what that boils down to is police involved shootings. And I can probably imagine, and I don't know the data for the sheriff's office up there in Jacksonville, I would like to wager that there's probably not a lot of police involved shootings, to your credit. There's probably not a lot of violent situations in which police officers find themselves in, to your credit. Here in Miami, right now, our office has 375 cases. And if I were to tell you that the most complaints we get in our office are lower level discourtesy cases. There's individuals that come into our office and says, hey, this officer gave me a ticket, but they were a jerk about it. This officer came to my house for a domestic dispute, and maybe I was wrong about what was going on, but I deserved a police report and I didn't get one. or I should have got this police service and didn't happen, or I was, you know, falsely arrested at my local grocery store because I parked illegally and they were rude about it, right? These are the things that you're missing when you talk about police oversight not being useful, because these are the things that erode trust within communities, right? When we're talking about police accountability as it relates to these little discourtesy complaints, they add up and it becomes a bigger issue. And when you erode trust between community and policing, that's what creates the dynamic that we have now, right? So don't get me wrong. At the end of the day, I want police officers to use less force, you know, where force is being used, and obviously do the response to resistance report or excessive force reports. Don't get me wrong. We need to do the big things right too. But it's the little things that we're doing wrong that is creating this divide we have in our communities right now. And when the community doesn't trust the police, that hurts your job as well, because now you can't solve crime. If you don't have independent witnesses that come forward because they believe the police department is going to do the right thing, you just won't be able to do your job effectively, right? So I think those are some of the talking points and some of the situations that maybe you're missing, and those are the beauty of oversight, because you then get these cases and you can find revisions within your own training. You can find different equitable solutions and how you go about your everyday police work that looks more like safety, that looks more like wellness, not only for the community, but for the officers, that looks more like reform efforts that have two individuals in a room talking about their issues. And that's really the goal here when we're looking at it, right? I want us to do the big things right too, but at the end of the day, definitely in the state of Florida, if there's a police involved shooting, I tell people all the time, listen, you got to know who you need to go to. If there's a police involved shooting, yeah, I want to know, thanks for letting me know, but don't go to me. You need to go to the state attorney's office, because they're the ones who are going to indict and press charges, right? If you're upset about police culture and how police officers are going on the beat, you need to talk to your police chief, because they're the ones that can affect culture within their police departments. If you're upset that an officer got suspended with pay and they're still getting their checks while they're at home, you need to be upset at your local officials for collective bargaining agreements, because they're the ones who set those in place. So a good majority of the work that I do is helping people understand who to be angry at and when, but also helping people like you, Mr. Cox, and other officials to understand how police oversight helps bring together those gaps so people have a better functionality on their communities. So I just wanted to push back against some of those talking points just a little bit. But I think the fact that you're here, you're on the same track, but I just think there's just been some miscommunication along the way.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. I could be quiet, but I'm gonna say a little bit. I totally agree with you 100%. That was phenomenal. Mr. Cox, and again, about a week or two ago, I spoke with Chief Burton almost about an hour about some things, and one of them was the Civilian Oversight Board, and kind of knowing that she was not for it. But I know she's talking about being more transparent and communicating more. I'm like Ms. Jacobs, I don't agree with that part about FDLE doing the work and JSO staying out of it. I don't. I think also that's a great point for the civilian oversight to be a part of. I think in every organization, from the school district to everything, everybody do their investigation. Now, I think, again, with the civilian oversight, that can help, again, in building and establishing and maintaining trust in the community. But maybe the FDLE would be good for coming afterwards and whatnot. But JSO should still do this thing. They should not be afraid. That's what leadership is about. They should be transparent about what they're doing and still be able to articulate and communicate with the community. If something is wrong, if the officer did right, back him or her. If they didn't, then do what needs to be done. Also, you said that former Chief Williams, I think, had something where he met with community members and said it was a whole bunch of things that he was going to do and whatnot. Then he put it on the back shelf and never materialized. Well, that's called a forum to me. Like I say, too often we have the same people, i.e. ministers and whatnot, that they always run to. Have a forum with the community members. Community members will tell you exactly what they're feeling also in the community to try to make things right, to try to find a medium. So again, those are some things that I hope that she if she if she becomes sheriff, that she would look at change. Again, this civilian oversight. I think you guys need to reach out. We need to reach out to Mr. Finnell and Mr. Jacobs. They have the experience. We've had something from a city council member that's been on the bike burner for years, which probably 99% of us in our community or in the city don't know anything about. These two young men are very reputable. Again, see how much it costs. And I think Mr. Jacobs said he was willing to be talking to y'all for free.
Free, not free. I'm just here to help. I'm a man of the people. Free.
That seemed like
And
that's.
if you hate it at the end of the day, you can tell them to go play in traffic and kick rocks.
Yeah, but it seemed like his sentiments are being done for the community. And I think Mr. Finnell, is the same way and whatnot. So we definitely need help. We do. And like I say, this is something that I would like to see materialize. But I've also heard that it would be very hard to do because of the city's charter. That's why I say when we had this, I didn't know what this was really about. I thought it was going to be ways on how to break through that charter, having, speaking legally and whatnot and everything. So, but I hope that Chief Burton, if she wins, that she changed a lot of the things that she's talking about doing. So thank you.
Yeah. So Mr. Sloan, if you sat with her for an hour, I think you probably heard her on the phone for an hour. You've probably heard her heart in regards to community involvement and how she wants to get the community involved. But one of the things that you brought up that's relevant is the fact that, the city charter, the way the city charter is written, if we had a civilian review board tomorrow, they wouldn't have subpoena power. Because you're talking to a JSO elected sheriff. So unless the sheriff was to make them, respond to that subpoena, they wouldn't have subpoena power. And you were talking about having, what the suggestion was when FDLE does the investigation, it's not removing JSO totally, but when they go out to the actual crime scene and collecting the evidence and processing the evidence, they would do that. The state attorney's office would make a decision whether or not there was any criminal intent or not. And then JSO would do the administrative side of it. So when she's talking about bringing in FDLE, it's just to collect the evidence and actually work the crime scene. And then they would give us a report of what happened at the crime scene. And then JSO would still do their administrative review to see if any policies were violated. And then of course the state attorney does criminal.
Let me ask you something. You said something about the cameras, and isn't that based upon the state attorney, or is that based upon the sheriff making that determination when this release?
So both. So the state attorney gets that evidence, and once the state attorney says, "Hey, we no longer need that evidence. We have everything we need from that video," what has occurred in the past, and the evidence would come to the sheriff's office. Then the sheriff has a decision to when he or she can release it. So even though the state attorneys has said, "Hey, we don't need it," I'm not saying we don't need him. We're okay with you releasing it. The sheriff can still hold it for another 60 days, 6 months, however long he or she wants to hold it. So what she is proposing is that she would make it available much sooner once the state attorney's office says they no longer need it to be confidential.
Thank you.
Quick. I just want to say real quick to that. It's important for the community of Jacksonville to understand the real issues that are obviously facing your community as it relates to this, and understand also what aren't issues and what are things that make it seem like you're getting something. You're really not getting much of anything. I will say that by and large, a lot of people think subpoena powers are necessary for civilian oversight to be effective. I'm the first person to say that is a misconception. I've been working in oversight for almost 6 years. I have issued one subpoena, and it's not because we don't have the power to do it, because we obviously do. It's because we haven't needed to. We did it once, and it was to get payroll records from the University of Miami for some of their off-duty officers. I often say that the threat of the subpoena is probably more impactful than ever using a subpoena itself. And the only time that I would ever need to use one or even think about using one is to probably subpoena a police officer. And in my opinion, that is not, if it has come to that point where you need to subpoena a police officer to show up for a statement or a testimony, you probably A, haven't done a great job as an investigator, or B, it's just starting to unravel for you. Because more often than not, that investigator or that officer is going to come underneath the threat of a subpoena with your union official, and you're gonna get a whole bunch of I don't knows and I can't recall. So it's not gonna do a lot for your investigation. It's probably gonna cost you a lot of money. It's gonna get wrapped up in some litigation by and large. So if the community is saying, hey, we need subpoena powers for our oversight, or we don't want it, you guys don't die on that hill. That is not a hill to die on. You can still have great investigations without subpoena power. And I think in some cases, probably better investigations, because it forces you to think creatively on how you're going to investigate, what is useful and what is necessary. So if you get the whole talking point of don't do it because you won't get subpoena, that is a non-issue. You are being baited. Do not take the bait.
Senator Scott.
Oh, okay. I didn't see his
Well,
hand.
Anthony, I thought Anthony was next. Anthony.
Mr. Finnell, to go ahead.
Yes. First, I was hoping that Chief Burton would be here so we could engage in this discussion. And Mr. Cox, you say you've been with the department for 27 years. What is your rank, sir?
I am currently an assistant chief, and I am the training director for the agency.
Okay, I wanted to refer to, I wanted to acknowledge your rank and position as well. And congratulations, Assistant Chief. And you said the training director, correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, very important job, both of them, and just as demanding as chief in many respects. Because when things do hit the fan and they go to lawsuit, I'm sure you're called in to testify to the training and process and procedures that the officers should have followed. So a couple things you mentioned, and I was aware of Chief Burton's position on oversight prior to this, read some materials and looked at a few videos. But it's something you said, but then you said something later that, and I don't really think, I don't know if you thought about this or if you guys thought about this, but Mr. Jacobs, I think, hit it on the head with, I believe your position is formed primarily because of maybe not as clear an understanding of what oversight can and cannot do and is not. Because you said that Chief Burton doesn't believe in oversight and is not in support of civilian oversight for uses of force. And I think you limit it to that. Now, I don't know if it's a broad oversight objection, but you limit it to cases of uses of force. So I'll just stick with that.
Can I interject real quick?
Yes, sir.
So I said it that way because the culture here in Jacksonville, the main push for oversight was around officer involved shooting. So that's probably the loudest voice when it comes to civilian review boards, and why civilian review boards have been asked for in Jacksonville is because of officer involved shooting. So just want to throw that in there.
And that's important, and thank you, because oversight, unless you're in Chicago, doesn't really deal with officer involved shootings that much. Chicago may have 3 a week. Okay, I was there. I couldn't believe the number of officer involved shootings they have. Okay, so oversight will primarily deal, like Mr. Jacobs said, with officer discourtesy, rudeness, misconception or misunderstanding of JSO's policies and procedures on how to do simple things, or whatever. So even though the loud voice is about shootings, that's not what they're going to constantly be looking at. They will be looking at the other instances where, if not dealt with, can rise to an officer doing something that does make the headlines, if that makes sense. If an officer is repeatedly rude, discourteous to a segment of the community, and it goes unchecked, and the officer is not addressed because of that behavior, eventually that officer is going to do something that's going to get them in major trouble. And the problem behind that is someone on the reverse suffers from it, and they could die from it. Okay, the worst the least they could get is maybe an unjust arrest. The worst is obviously death. But if you had oversight, you could have identified a trend or a pattern with that officer prior to that officer escalating to an incident that nobody wanted to happen. So that's the first point I wanted to make. You have Chief Burton and others in her position have so much to deal with. They don't really, for the most part, have a full understanding of what oversight means. They just really hear from the loudest voices out there. And that's not ultimately, when I talked about everybody getting together and talking, that's not ultimately what the oversight would look like. Okay, or shouldn't look like. It should look like something that can help identify trends and patterns before they become a major issue, that can help create policies that will be able to address those issues before they become major, and will help chiefs and administration deal with troubled officers in a multitude of ways. Not everybody needs to be suspended, fired, or otherwise disciplined in that manner, but without those community oversight people at the table, without those community conversations, you cannot figure out or develop alternative ways, because you have the same people with the same ideas at the table. Okay. And if your agency is like my agency is like most agencies, they kind of rehash leadership. You know, I'm a captain today, I'll be a deputy chief tomorrow, and the next chief that comes in, I may be director over, the fleet or whatever, but I'm still in the command channel, you see? So they're not seeking new advice and tapping into their best resources, whereas with oversight, they are doing that. Now, you also said, as a compromise, bring in the Florida, Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, to investigate critical incidents, shootings, and whatnot. Well, that sounds great to someone who doesn't know any better, but to me, that was a huge red flag and a problem that if I, knowing what I know now, were advising Chief Burton, I say, no, do not say that, because, and I hope none of her opponents are on here, because I don't want to have a negative impact or provide any fodder for her opponents. But as a leader, you're acquiescing your authority. If you believe in your agency and the work that they do, and you say that it's good, and you say that it's above board, and you say that it's impartial, don't let someone else do it. Like I said before, let oversight be a part of that process so they can see. Because if the process is all that, they will understand it and see it and tell their story better than you could ever tell it. Having another law enforcement agency come in and say, oh, that's not telling it, okay? That's just not. And for the community that you're trying to reach, they're gonna see right through that. They're gonna see right through it. So FDLE comes in and says it's okay, but they're police. And even if it's a civilian investigator, it says FDLE. So to the community, they're police. So you stand on your work and let the oversight entity come in. But you said that FDLE would do the criminal. So oversight doesn't even do criminal. We are strictly administrative. So you can still be a part of the oversight because JSO is doing the administrative, the policy review to see if there's a policy violation. It's just, I mean, I know that's why I wish she was here. And hopefully, you can share that with her, because I don't know her. I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm not a Florida voter. I can't vote, but I support our Black and brown leaders in law enforcement. I will always support them because there's too few of them and we need them, because we do bring a very different perspective to law enforcement that's needed. I think we're more compassionate, more empathetic for the most part. And we can relate to a lot of the issues that our people face when they're dealing with police. But those were two things. Those are some of the things that really jumped out. And then the last piece was about the subpoena power. Well, Mr. Jacobs hit it on the head with that respect, that's not a deal breaker for having civilian oversight, because if you as a a police chief or you as a leader create a general order that says, as part of internal investigations, you will fully cooperate with whatever the name of the civilian entity is, just like you would cooperate with that internal affairs investigator, subject to an additional IA complaint. You know, they don't have a choice. They can always, their Bill of Rights allows them to bring a representative with them. So they're protected. But they should, an officer, it's an administrative review just the same. They should not be able to say, I'm not going to cooperate with that. You don't have a choice. It's the general order. And if you don't cooperate, you can go in there and say, I don't recall all day long. You just shoot yourself in the foot. But you need to show up and be on record of stating, I don't recall all day long. And then when you get disciplined, that's your fault. But to say, well, we can't do it because we don't have subpoena power is not, that's just a no-brainer to me. So if I were advising someone on how to create their policy, I would say, just put it in the general order.
So my statement was not that they couldn't do it because they wouldn't have subpoena power. I was just saying that they would not have subpoena power.
Right. No.
And let me say this, and for you and Mr. Jacobs, I have no doubt that you guys are subject matter experts and you know when it comes to review boards and you guys know your stuff. I've learned that in the last hour and 20 minutes or however long we've been on here. But let me just say this, a lot of what Chief Burton feels is based on what has happened here locally, which you all have not been privy to. So the statements that I've made on her behalf have been based on what she has gathered through community meetings, meeting with different citizens, so meeting with some of the different organizations here locally. And when they are saying, hey, we want a civilian review board, we want subpoena powers, we want this, we want that. And some of the things that some of our local groups that have been calling for civilian review boards, they are not covered by the charter, or they go against what the Officer Bill of Rights are, and they currently are not in line with the policy. So I totally get what you're all saying. And like I said, I understand what you're saying, but here locally, these are the things that are happening here in Jacksonville, which you may not have that information and know what's going on here. And so.
Well, Mr. Cox, you think you should be open to maybe proffering something to the community that looks like civilian oversight with the help of the both of us to say that, hey, I understand what the community wants, but this is what I think would be useful. What do you guys think? Or would she not be open to doing something like that?
No.
I know what her stance is now is that she is not. She when you talk about, so let me be more clear. If you're saying, hey, we want a civilian review board to look at officer involved shooting, she is not open to that. Now, do you come back and say, well, what about an oversight committee that audits units? That's something that you would have to ask her, because I've never heard that question posed to her. So let's be clear on her behalf for that.
Let's be clear.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a civilian review board that oversees criminal complaints in the state of Florida. That will never happen. So I don't know who said that to her or how it was said.
That's what's been asked for here locally, though.
But I'm sorry.
We have to be responsible as just individuals that are running for office. And I understand that people ask for all types of stuff in the community, but that's not a genuine response because she's essentially saying no to something that's already illegal. It's like her saying that I'm going to outlaw or I'm going to make murder illegal. Like that's like not answer.
Well, she's saying she's not in favor of them, and that's why when I started, I said, civilian review boards mean so many different things to different people. Some people think it means, hey, civilians come in and discipline officers, or they have the ability to suspend officers from work. So there's that situation can be so large, and like I said, it means so many different things to different people. So to narrow down and say, hey, this is a legislation that's being pushed through city council, and we want a oversight committee to do A, B, and C, and that's it. Then you can have a discussion, because right now we're just saying, well, what would this board even look like? And there's 1,000 different variations of what the board could look like. So That would have to be something that's narrowed down.
I think it may go a long way with the community if she proffered that on her own.
Well, I was going to say,
if she's not in favor of it, but go ahead, Anthony.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, because what I'm hearing, Mr. Cox, is she's making a statement. She's not in favor of civilian oversight. And then she then zeroes in on, again, officer involved shootings is just one component. I think, and I said earlier, part of creating civilian is having multiple conversations. What you end up with obviously is not what everyone wants. There are people out there that want civilian oversight that can hire and fire and blah, blah, blah. Okay, they want it. So what? But to say you're not in favor of it when that is such an outlier request, and so you base your position on that is troubling. I would say that before she forms an opinion about it, before anyone, not just her, but anyone form an opinion one way or the other about it, get an understanding of what it is and what it can be. Obviously, there's things in Florida, like any other state, that there are laws and restrictions on what can happen. But it doesn't really matter what people say they want, because they have to go to the state house to get that fixed. So, but we're talking about what can you do? And oftentimes I'll tell people, in my consultancy, all right, you've spent an hour of my time. I mean, it's your money, but you spend an hour of my time telling me what you can't do. And I want to talk about what can you do? I know all the things we can't do because it's codified in state laws, codified in the charters, codified in this. I already know that. I've done my research. What is it that we can do? So let's deliver that. And I know it's really late in the campaign game, but let's say she wins. Okay, then these are conversations that can happen because she's got new information. Therefore, her position can change. And I think it would be worth looking at, say, if she's in that position, because at the end of the day, bringing in some other agency to look at something that might happen, unfortunately, I mean, hopefully it doesn't, but it's law enforcement, so it might happen a couple of times throughout her tenure versus something that happens
every day
on a daily basis. She really needs to think about that. If you really want to be transparent, which I believe she does, I'm not saying anything because I don't know her or anything, but I'm just saying, if you really want to be from the community's perspective, then deliver something that will provide that. And it doesn't cost. The money spent on it is well worth the effort because it develops and institutionalizes community trust, so that the next person that comes along, they can't just take it away. Now it's been in place, it's been working, and that next person that comes along, their campaign talking points have to be, I'm going to expand on it. They see how successful it was with her. Not, now I don't think about it, or I don't agree with it, and again, you're going to have those outliers that are going to want to be in there every time she makes a decision, they want to have a voice in it. But that's ridiculous, but, and that's just my position. Like I said, I don't have a dog in the fight other than this is what I do, every day on a national level. And when I talk to chiefs and police administrators who have a very similar position, once we finish talking, rarely do I have them so dug into that position that they stay there. I can move the needle somewhat for various reasons. One, because I'm, a career police officer myself, and I've been in the trenches and done all of those things. Been in those split second decision situations, and I've also looked at it from this side of the aisle as a oversight practitioner.
So Mr. Finnell, we're just about up with our time. So really appreciate all the effort everybody has made to make this a really successful meeting. Victoria, did you want to wrap up?
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, especially our speakers, Mr. Jacobs, Fox, you as well. It's been a great discussion, and seeing both sides of the conversation has been very enlightening, especially for me, someone who's also learning about oversight boards as we're going through this. I appreciate you all for taking the time tonight to join us in this meeting and discussion. Thank you, Mr. Jacobs, for adding your contact information, and we will be sure to send everyone the documents that Mr. Jacobs will be forwarding to me. That is all.
And I did see.
Great.
I
Great.
did see some comments on perhaps having a follow-up where we get some other organizations involved. I think that's a good idea, because we've got to resolve this issue one way or the other in the community. And this has been good information.
Yeah, I think the curse of any good legislation or public policy is misinformation. So it's good to have a baseline of fact. And maybe there's some misinformation swirling around the Jacksonville community. So listen, I'm local, or kind of local, down here in Miami. Feel free to use and abuse me, guys. We're here as a resource. There's only 3 or 4 other oversight entities in the state of Florida. One's in Sarasota. They have an audit model in St. Pete as well. We have the county one here. We have the one in North Miami. Ours has been around the longest, and it has the most built out resources. So honestly, guys, feel free to reach out anytime. I like to think I'm easy to get along with. I'm so easy to love. Honestly, just reach out, guys, anytime.
Well, thank all of you. And I did also want to thank our interns, Ms. Dickerson, Ms. Crawford, and Ms. Krasnogor for making this happen. So thank you all, and have a great evening, and look forward to hopefully more conversations.
Thank you, guys. It was great.
Thank you as well. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.